Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's military says it now controls 40% of Gaza City as its forces expand their assault on densely populated residential areas, including camps for displaced Palestinians. Israeli attacks so far today have killed at least 44 people across the Gaza Strip, including at least 7 children. This is Samaya Mikdad, a relative of a family hit by an Israeli strike near Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City Thursday that killed a pregnant woman and her unborn child.
The woman was getting ready to deliver a baby. Here are the diapers for the baby's clothes. In the month she was due to deliver. What is her fault? This is a people's tent. What is their fault? Is it a war against Hamas, or is it a war against the people?
Palestinian health officials say at least 30% of those killed by Israeli attacks are minors, amounting to 28 children or an entire classroom slaughtered every day for nearly 2 years. Meanwhile, a prominent Palestinian academic has starved to death amidst Israel's blockade of food and medicine. Before his death, 60-year-old Omar Harb lost 26 members of his family to Israeli attacks, including his wife, several children, and grandchildren. He died Thursday, reportedly weighing less than 40 kilograms, or 88 pounds. With Harb's death, the number of Palestinians who've died of hunger and malnutrition has soared to at least 370. Meanwhile, Hamas has released a video showing Israeli hostages Guy Gilboa Dalal and Alon Ohel being driven around Gaza City, purportedly on August 28th. The video's release comes after Israeli leaders rejected a Hamas proposal for a comprehensive deal to release remaining hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and an end to Israel's assault. The U.S. Treasury Department announced sanctions Thursday against 3 prominent Palestinian human rights groups operating in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, citing their support for an international criminal court investigation into Israeli war crimes committed in Gaza, including genocide. In a statement, the Center for Constitutional Rights condemned the U.S. government's sanctions against Al-Haq, Al-Mazan, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. CCR writes, quote, "At the height of Israel's U.S.-backed genocide against the Palestinian people, the Trump administration cynically chosen to punish the advocates leading the charge for accountability. This attack cements the United States government's complicity in Israel's crimes," CCR writes. In Afghanistan, the death toll from a series of earthquakes has climbed to 2,200 as a third earthquake struck the southeastern part of Afghanistan Thursday. The earthquakes left tens of thousands of people homeless and injured more than 3,600. Many women were left trapped under the rubble due to cultural rules enforced by the Taliban forbidding physical contact between men and women who are not family members. A rescue worker speaking to the New York Times said, quote, "It felt like women were invisible," unquote. In Indonesia, authorities fired a police officer in connection with the death of a food delivery driver killed in Jakarta during an anti-government protest. The protests, led by students, workers, and human rights groups, have been spreading across Indonesia since last week, drawing attention to lavish spending by politicians, as well as police violence. On Wednesday, hundreds of Indonesian women wielding brooms joined protesters who marched on the parliament in Jakarta.
Women are at the heart of the struggle, but our voices are often not heard. One thing that should be considered is the participation of women, how the state has an obligation to value, respect, fulfill, and promote human rights and women's rights, but the state neglects to do so.
We'll go to Jakarta later in the broadcast to speak with Human Rights Watch about the protests. On Capitol Hill, senators grilled Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thursday over his false claims about vaccines and mass firings and resignations of public health officials at the CDC and other agencies. The hearing opened with Oregon Senator Ron Wyden accusing Kennedy of elevating crackpots and conspiracy theorists while seeking to cut off access to vaccines. Virginia Senator Mark Warner asked Kennedy whether he accepts that 1 million Americans died from COVID, to which Kennedy replied, "I don't know how many died, and I don't think anybody knows."
The Secretary of Health and Human Services doesn't know how many Americans died from COVID. Let them know if the vaccine helped prevent any deaths. And you are sitting as Secretary of Health and Human Services? How can you be that ignorant?
We'll have more on that hearing after headlines. On Thursday, 2 former top officials at the National Institutes of Health filed whistleblower complaints, saying they were forced out of their leadership positions after they criticized the Trump administration for canceling grants and spreading vaccine skepticism. Separately, ousted CDC Director Susan Monares wrote in an op-ed that Kennedy had her fired after she insisted all recommendations be based on credible data, not ideology or preordained outcomes. We'll be speaking later in the broadcast with Dr. Paul Offit, a vaccine expert at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who was removed from the Food and Drug Administration's Vaccine Advisory Committee without explanation. President Trump's nominee to serve on the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors said Thursday he has no plans to step down as a senior economic advisor to the president and would instead take an unpaid leave of absence from his White House role while working at the Fed. Stephen Miron's proposal drew sharp criticism from Senate Democrats, who said his confirmation would threaten the U.S. central bank's independence. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren spoke at the start of his confirmation hearing.
Illegally removing a Fed governor is a key step in Trump's scheme to destroy the independence of the Fed and turn it into his own personal toy. He wants to install his lackeys so that we will have a Fed that uses its power to please the president, but that can't be trusted to keep inflation under control.
None of the Republicans in the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee appeared to oppose Miron's nomination, indicating he's likely to be confirmed. Meanwhile, the Justice Department's launched a criminal investigation into Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, who's accused of criminal mortgage fraud for listing more than one property as a primary residence when she applied for loans, allegedly to secure lower interest rates. Cook's lawyer said in response the Trump administration is inventing justifications to fire Cook as part of President Trump's pressure campaign against the Fed, an independent government agency. ProPublica reports at least 3 of President Trump's cabinet members call multiple homes their primary residences on mortgages. In Minneapolis, Vice President J.D. Vance met Wednesday with families and survivors of last week's mass shooting at the Annunciation Catholic Church. Protesters gathered along the route of Vance's motorcade, holding signs reading pro-life equals pro-gun safety and hate won't make America great. On Thursday, CNN reported senior Justice Department officials are weighing proposals to limit transgender people's right to possess firearms because the Minneapolis shooter was a trans woman. According to the Violence Prevention Project, 98% of mass shooters in the United States are men and boys. Less than 1% are trans people. Republican leaders of both the House and Senate will reportedly not hold votes to extend President Trump's takeover of the Washington, D.C. police force before it expires next week. This comes after D.C.'s Attorney General filed a federal lawsuit seeking to have the deployment declared unlawful and disbanded, and after a federal magistrate judge condemned what he called implausible, illegal, and immoral, unquote, prosecutions of defendants accused of felonies after they were swept up for relatively minor offenses. Meanwhile, the Justice Department Thursday sued Boston over its sanctuary policy limiting cooperation between city, police, and federal immigration agents. And in Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker says he expects the Trump administration to deploy a surge of ICE agents to Chicago this weekend, and that Trump could use resulting protests to deploy National Guard troops despite the governor's objections. Northwestern University's president, Michael Schill, has announced he will resign. The This comes after the Trump administration froze $790 million in research funding to Northwestern back in April. Schill had testified on Capitol Hill last year about alleged anti-Semitism on campus and was grilled by Republican lawmakers about negotiating with pro-Palestinian student organizers to end protests on campus. Schill's resignation came a day after Harvard won a landmark lawsuit challenging the Trump administration for similarly withholding research funds. In Harvard's case, it was more than $2 billion. A federal appeals court ruled Thursday that the immigration detention center in Florida Everglades Swamp, dubbed Alligator Alcatraz by the Republicans, can continue operating. The ruling blocks the lower court's ruling that ordered state and federal agencies to shut down the Immigration and Customs Enforcement jail. Meanwhile, the Trump administration says it's using the notorious Angola State Prison in Louisiana to incarcerate undocumented immigrants held by ICE. Republican Governor Jeff Landry was joined outside the prison Wednesday by Attorney General Pam Bondi and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem as they announced plans to house more than 400 men inside, half of whom are due to arrive by the end of the month. President Trump signing an executive order today renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War, the title it held for over 150 years until just after the Second World War, when the name was changed through an act of Congress. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who's consistently referred to U.S. soldiers as warriors, will now have the title of Secretary of War. The Pentagon says 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets flew near a U.S. naval warship in international waters near Venezuela Thursday, describing the incident as a show of force. The reported incident came as senior Trump administration officials are refusing to provide proof of their claims that a U.S. military strike that blew up a boat in the Caribbean earlier this week was carrying drugs from Venezuela. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Wednesday he watched a live video feed of an operation that the vessel targeted by the Pentagon was operated by the Tren de Aragua gang. But Hegseth provided no evidence to back the claims. Venezuela's communication minister claimed the video was a fake made with artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, President Nicolas Maduro announced he's mobilizing over 8 million people into the National Bolivarian militia to defend Venezuela against U.S. aggression. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. And here in New York City, Mayor Eric Adams reportedly considering dropping out of the mayoral race after he met with one of President Trump's closest advisors, Steve Witkoff, this week in Florida. Speaking to reporters, President Trump confirmed he's paying close attention to the mayoral race, saying, quote, "I would like to see 2 people drop out and have it be one-on-one," unquote. The New York Times reports Trump is considering offering Adams and Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa positions in his administration to clear the field for former Governor Andrew Cuomo to challenge Zohran Mamdani in the general election after Mamdani defeated Cuomo in the Democratic primary in June. Mamdani spoke out Wednesday about Trump's interference in New York City politics.
We are talking about a mayor who was facing an indictment that was then dropped by this administration to ensure greater collaboration with the immigration directives of this administration, now being considered for a job offer such that he would drop out of a race to represent this city because of the fact that they believe that would increase the odds of anyone being able to defeat me.
Democratic mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.